for Jordan. No, I just think about it every time now. Welcome back to another episode of Tripping Off, the Trauma-Focused Hypnotherapy Podcast. I wanted to start today, first of all, discussing about perhaps changing the schedule, because we record these on Monday morning, and it brings a certain kind of energy. I'm exhausted today. I feel like your emotional energy is much more consistent throughout the week than mine is. I feel like I've got these like fluctuations. Mondays feel different. Tuesdays feel different.
I think I get a little bit of energy from like a Monday morning, like it's like a pre-game time, like let's do it.
Okay.
I think usually by Monday evenings I hit that low.
You taper out?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, but Monday mornings I'm like, okay, transition brain from weekend back into. It's not that I don't like Mondays, because there's a lot of people who like hate Mondays, obviously. But I mean, I love Mondays. It's just turning my brain back on to all the things that I left unfinished on Friday.
Maybe it's because I didn't turn my brain off over the weekend.
Oh,
so it's just carrying
that'll do it. It's like a vacation that's too short. You ever take like a 2-3 day vacation and it's like, I almost just wish I didn't go, because like turning off and turning back on is more tiring than if I had just stayed at work.
It's very tiring.
All that aside, I think today will be a wonderful day to talk about how does hypnosis actually help trauma?
Right.
We get the question a lot. It's a very introductory question, but I kind of want to have a place and a sound bite, a YouTube video that shares a little bit more in depth than what I might be able to share as I'm passing somebody in a hallway. How hypnotherapy really helps trauma, more so than traditional therapy, maybe more so than some of the other techniques that are out there, and why we're so passionate about it.
I mean, my hallway description is magic.
I mean, that's not bad, actually.
Right?
You're not wrong either. Magic. You need a little magic wand.
I do. I have one in my office for whenever anybody's just like, well, when is this going to stop? Like, when am I going to stop thinking about this thing? And they're totally in a trance about it. I have a little like thing right beside my chair that just holds a bunch of like knickknacks. And I just reach down very slowly and I pull the wand out and I go, right now.
Yeah.
Climbs off. I was just like,
roll their eyes.
Okay, Zach.
I love a good eye roll in therapy. It means you got them. How do you start answering that question? Where do you begin? How does hypnosis address and help trauma?
Well, kind of the short description that we were talking about earlier is, I think that any traumatic event is not just the event. It's how we think about it and what we do about whatever the event is afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
As evidenced by how one thing can be traumatic to one person and that same thing is not traumatic to this other person. About how something that seems like it seems, let's be specific about that, like it seems like it shouldn't be that traumatic is to one person, and something that would traumatize everybody else is not traumatic for this other person.
Exactly.
It's because of all of the trances that we build around that event. So the event happens, and then we have one story that we tell ourselves after another story that we tell ourselves, and all of those stories usually like work together to prove a larger point or a larger story about what that action was. And I think why when description of when somebody says, well, I'm not hypnotizable or something along those lines, it's like, well, you are, and it's so evidenced by all of the stories that we tell ourselves, that we hypnotize ourselves on in order to make sense of that thing that we couldn't make sense of at the time.
Absolutely. Well, and that's a question that a lot of people have, is why is something traumatizing to one person and not another person? And the definitive answer is, it's the stories you tell yourself about what happened.
Absolutely.
And so if you're wondering, why is it that one thing's traumatic to one person and not to another? It's because there's a story that we tell ourselves about that event that determines how significant it is in our life. And so
100%.
hypnotherapy is going back in, because you don't know what story you've told yourself about that event.
Well, and it may not even be your story, to be fair. It might be something that somebody else told you, or
usually, yes.
Yeah, right? Like, it's like, oh, well, you know, you're a kid and a parent says, a real man deals with a situation like this. And then you go, well, okay, well, I trust you. You're my parents. Probably shouldn't. But what else are you going to, who else are you going to rely on? And so we incorporate that story that's told to us as like, well, this is, I want to be a real man. I'm told that I'm supposed to be a real man. So I guess I'll deal with it that way.
Yep. Yep. And so these stories live inside of us without us even really knowing. So when we talk about the subconscious, that's really what we mean. It's these automatic processes, these stories that we tell ourselves that we're not even consciously aware of. And so hypnotherapy helps trauma because it goes into the subconscious and rewrites that story.
Yeah, like unconsciously makes sense of what really happened and how the world really is in a radical acceptance kind of way,
Yeah.
to make it so that we go, oh wait, like I can be a real man like this, not I don't have to be a real man like that. And there's this freedom that happens when we break that trance to where it's no longer the thing that we're holding on to in order to be okay with whatever that initial event was.
Yeah. Because we do have to tell ourselves a story. You can't get through a situation without telling yourself a story. I mean, at least you can't get through a situation without telling yourself a story and still be human.
Yeah.
I mean, I think computers do that. They hold on to stories without any judgment. They just data on a hard drive,
Yep.
right? Human beings don't do that. In order for us to function, like we have to give some meaning to the experiences that we have so we can make informed decisions about what's going to happen next.
Yeah, because we certainly don't want to go back to having that experience that we just had that was really not good.
No.
So we use that to say, how many people have said something like this? That can never happen again. Well, one, I feel that I empathize with the person that's going to say that because
Yeah, I understand where that's coming from.
it's so bad.
Right.
It's so destructive. It's so frightening. It's so scary. And I don't want you to go back to that feeling, but that thing absolutely can happen again, as evidenced by your fear of it happening again.
Right. Because if it wasn't going to happen again, you wouldn't be afraid of it happening again.
Exactly.
So it's like you're already stuck.
And that's where the loop that starts, that trance about the story, about that instance.
Let's get a little specific. When we're talking about this, the stories that we tell ourselves, do you have maybe an example that comes to your mind? I mean, I know one does for me, but could you maybe illustrate?
Yeah, I mean,
this concept we're talking about.
The first one that comes to my mind is the first time that occurred to me. Was a client that I had that had been coming in, and she had been sexually assaulted years before, didn't tell anybody, didn't wanted to just erase it from her brain, and she did well enough for a period of time. And she came in, we did all of this really great work, and probably 8 months, 9 months, she was like, I think I'm ready to date for the first time in the last 10 years.
Okay.
And she entirely rewrote that story in her head about how men are and how she's not safe. Because so the first trance was she was brought up in a situation, which is fine. You're safe. No one's going to hurt you. In this specific case, but this also applies to a lot of other cases, Dad said, I'll always protect you. I'll never allow you to be hurt by anybody. Right? And so what ended up happening?
Something he can really promise.
He can't. Like
I mean, as much we can promise to try our best, perhaps, but you can't promise to keep someone perfectly safe.
And that was the trance that she and her dad were in about that. And then when she went to college, she was sexually assaulted.
Sure.
And then she was just like, I can't date. About 10 years later, she sees me, and she's like, I want to get back into dating. But she still had that trance. One, I can never be sexually assaulted again. And two, because my dad is going to protect me.
Wow. That hinges a lot on Dad.
There's so much there. And so that,
imagine if her father suddenly passed away. Oh my
Well,
gosh.
he wasn't in the picture anymore.
Oh, even worse. Yeah.
Exactly.
I'm just thinking like, well, that's another trauma, like just waiting to happen. And I mean, in so many multiple ways.
So she takes that energy and she puts it on guys that she's interested in.
Oh
He's
no,
going to
that makes
protect
sense
me.
though.
He's going to protect me. He's going to keep me safe. That's a man's job. And so
Mm.
this guy that I really admire, that I really enjoy, that seems safe can be my protector now.
Mm.
But the re-traumatizing thing happened when she went out on a date with this guy. The first date, he seemed really good. They were messaging, they were communicating. He seemed very safe, and then he tried to sexually assault her. First date after 10 years of not dating, and all of that stuff rushed back.
Man, what a you think catch a break, you know? First date?
First date.
Ah, boy.
Now, to be fair, she'd been seeing him for a little while. She had been vetting him,
Sure.
but he was still not this idea that she was entranced with about that was her dad.
Yeah.
And so when that happened, she dealt with it really well because she had done a lot of really good work. She had let go of the rigidity in that trance, but she hadn't let go of all of the trance.
Mm.
And so what ended up happening is she got herself out of the situation without being assaulted, but it was all of that previous stuff that came back. Now,
Yeah,
the
that'll
job,
flood. Yeah, that'll bring you right back.
right? Our job then in therapy was to continue letting go of that trance of projecting. She had let go of the trance of her dad's always going to be there. Now, taking that energy and projecting it onto some guy.
That's a healthy process to like start letting that go. And even because it happens so automatically. So I'm sure there was a lot of time spent just even uncovering that she was doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, it's hard to find sometimes.
Well, I think in the second situation, she didn't know that she hadn't already let go of all of that. And how could you let go of it entirely?
Mm.
But I think she dealt with it so well because she was in the process of letting go of it.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. I've had I guess an example that I'll share. There's a few, but two I think I'll share off the top of my head. One is man, these stories that we tell ourselves. We go through these experiences in our lives, and then we narrate a story about what that thing means. And so
Oh
I had
yeah.
it's kind of a, I don't want to reveal anything, but it's a mishmash of clients. But the typical plot line that I see, right? I have an individual who was physically assaulted growing up by parents, right? And so they grow up and, they're seeing me as a young adult and they tell me they're like, I need to be strong. And so all of their decisions in life are about what can I do to be stronger. And so the frustration that they came in with was, I'm losing my motivation. I want to go to the gym, but I can't get out of bed and go to the gym. I want to
Sure.
go to school, but I can't get the motivation to get my homework done. They're like they when they looked into this and they looked into their motivation, they realized the story that they were telling themselves based on the trauma was if I was stronger, those things wouldn't have happened to me. And so then the rest of their life is spent, I need to be stronger, I need to be stronger. But their subconscious knew and was sabotaging their motivation because deep down they knew that doesn't matter how strong you are, there's always a bigger fish.
Sure. Well, the unconscious mind was saying, really, is this the motivation that we want to use to do better?
And you can only maintain that motivation for so long. Now, I mean, they were hitting the gym very hard for quite some time, but you can only hold on to that motivation for so long. And so we talked and we offered, through hypnosis, we offered a new interpretation solution to the story, which was um, pursuing happiness makes me stronger.
That's great. Well, and what strikes me even before that is like how um like detrimental. I can't think of the perfect word for this, but
Mm.
like how like evil the outcome of seeing the world through every little thing.
Mm.
I need to be stronger.
Mm.
I did that thing, should have done it stronger. That thing should have done it stronger. This relationship should have been stronger.
Well, and you're exactly right. And any mistake that this individual made turned into more evidence of you're weak, you're vulnerable. You're weak, you're vulnerable. There was no opportunity for them to just learn because, learning involves making mistakes. That's how you learn. You can't learn without making mistakes. And so instead of just having the freedom to be like, I'm really interested in this topic, this is something I want to do, I'm going to make mistakes and like figure this thing out. Every mistake experience, every learning experience became a reinforcement of you're weak, you're vulnerable, you're weak, you're vulnerable. And that was a story that they were telling themselves, which was not functional. They could not continue living with that story. And so through hypnosis, we're able to rewrite that. It's like, hey, your goal should be to go live life and be happy.
Right.
And the reason for that is by being happy, you are the strongest version of yourself.
Yeah.
So they're like, yeah, some days I just want to sleep in. It's like, well, maybe you need some sleep.
Yeah, that
Maybe. And they would just not sleep a lot. It's like maybe if sleeping in makes you happy, what if your body's trying to tell you we need a little sleep in order to be the best version of ourselves? We need a day off in order to be the best version of ourselves.
and I think for anybody watching or listening to this is the therapeutic thing that is so beneficial is rewriting that story, because if you just address each one of like, no, in this situation that's not really stronger, in this situation you're just like trying to put out all of those little fires that they see that are there because they're seeing the world through the lens of I need to be stronger. You're going to be you're going to get them addicted to therapy because that's the only reprieve that they have from that story.
Oof, addicted to therapy.
Yeah, and in that way, like they'll never be able to be happy because the lens is still I need to be stronger. And so just changing that cognition about being stronger in this scenario
Yeah.
isn't going to do anything. Well, besides getting them addicted to therapy, because there's only one place that they ever have to have a reprieve. Like and I like that word reprieve because it's like the person is sitting here going like this is the only hour that I have to not feel bad. But then as soon as they go back out into I should have walked to my car stronger.
Yep.
I should have been stronger driving.
There's no absolute, like, absolute strength. That just doesn't, well, there's no absolutes, except for
That
but you see, it allows the brain to start to sabotage things. And so, to be honest, like you say, addicted to therapy, that's the best possible outcome. I mean, if that is the way that you live your life and believe, then it's very common that people will substitute substance use for those things because it's the only other way to turn their brain off.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like because deep down the subconscious knows that that's not a functional story to tell ourselves. And so that's best scenario.
So and I'll give my description of it too, but what that brings up is like how do you actually get them to address the idea of the lens of I have to be stronger versus addressing whatever they're applying that to. So it's like content, very high level thoughts. I need to be stronger at school, for example, but it could be anything.
Sure.
To when because that's what clients do, right? Is they come to us and they're just like, hey, here's this thing that I need to fix. I've been getting bad grades. I need to do better.
Mm-hmm.
I need to. I'm lifting this weight and I need to lift more.
Right.
And so instead of saying like cognitively and just at a high level, well, do you really? And trying to change that cognition about the gym, about school. How do you quickly address the stronger lens versus school or the gym or whatever the example is?
Yeah, I think it's something that we say in our trainings all the time, which is people don't change without an experience.
Yeah.
And so really the difference between what we're talking about here and more traditional like CBT therapy, which also addresses maladaptive thinking, right? Bad thinking. The reason that people can stall out and struggle with CBT therapy and hypnotherapy takes them further is that hypnotherapy incorporates the experience of positive and healthy thinking.
Well, and that's the difference between, I don't know, what I see a lot of therapists doing
Hmm.
and somebody that's actually trauma informed.
True, true. Yeah, and so what do I mean by that, right? Is like in those experiences, we'll go into a trance, we'll have some hypnosis time, and we'll create a scenario where they can feel loving themselves, being happy without having to be the strongest,
and
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 just sit in that moment.
and feel at the deepest of levels.
Right, right. At a subconscious level, not just like imagination while I'm consciously aware, like really true viscerally feeling what that experience is like. So that way they can take that and then go and recreate that experience in their day-to-day life. And that's the huge difference for me. Is like we can address
Absolutely.
thinking, like we can talk things through in therapy, but until somebody has the experience of what healthy living is like, it's difficult, well, I would say impossible to change. And most traditional therapy relies on the client to create that experience for themselves outside of therapy.
Outside of therapy.
So that's why many therapists will give homework, right? And so that homework is very important. And many therapists will get frustrated at you if you don't complete your homework because they understand that without practicing and
Yep.
having that experience outside of the therapy session, a person cannot get better. But obviously, when we're talking about complex trauma, it's really, really scary to go and try and practice that. And there's a lot of variables.
Yeah, it's not safe.
So
I'm not just not
hypnosis,
doing it.
right, helps them to experience that in a safe place without putting the pressure on them. It gets things started.
And I think that just to add to that, the thing in our head that makes it so that it's not effective when it's not effective
Mm,
is that even if I do have the experience, I still have that cognitive brain that's telling me that story. That even in the
yeah,
experience, I'm sabotaging it by telling myself that pre-existing story as I'm having this experience of that story not working out. Like, how many times have we, even as individuals, like anybody, this isn't just for clients, but how many times have we had experiences where it's like actually healthy, like partner and you like get to like work through communication,
oh,
and then
true.
and
Yeah.
and you have that moment where you're like, wow, that was we we settled that well. And then immediately your brain goes to, yeah, but that won't happen in the future. Yeah, but
There it goes.
yeah, and then so then when there is that cognitive thinking that is in the moment of the experience, it just like dismisses the positive experience and also concretizes the negative
It
experience.
sabotages the work.
Sabotage, yeah,
It
that's a
can
great one.
even make the homework reinforce the negative stories.
Absolutely, I think that's what it does most of the time.
So here your therapist, well-intentioned as they may be, is giving you homework to do at home, but because that story still lives in your head, that homework actually reinforces the trauma.
I see that all of the
It
time,
happens all the time. Happens all the
especially
time.
with my interns. Is that they're especially when they're like graduate interns, but also like registered interns, our residency program,
Yeah.
and they say, oh, I told my client to do A, B, and C. When they did it, and I'm so confused about how they got all of these negative things out of the homework that I was giving them. And I'm like,
Whoopsies.
well, yeah, of course they did, because they were thinking too much about the experience instead of being and just having that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the most common stories that we tell ourselves is it's our fault
Sure.
rather than seeing things for what they really are. And I find that as a therapist, I fight that one with my clients the most. And that is often the experience that I give them inside of hypnosis, the experience of this happened, but it doesn't have to be your fault. It's not your fault. And that's, I mean, that was the other story that I was thinking of to illustrate what we're talking about here today is somebody has, gets assaulted and they think to themselves, well, I should have parked in a more well-lit area. I
Right.
shouldn't have gone to the bathroom by myself. I shouldn't have been at that bar. I should have brought a friend, right? It's like, well, I mean, there's hundreds of examples, first of all, of when somebody did all those things and still got in trouble. And then two, even if you did all those things, that still doesn't give somebody the right to assault you.
Right.
And so by saying those things, I shoulda, we're excusing the person who did the wrong thing
And then we're also internalizing it.
and internalizing it. So now, what do you think you're going to go around feeling like? You're going to be feeling like the guilt of the person who did the wrong thing because you blamed yourself for something evil that happened. So, of course, you're going to feel guilty and ashamed and want to hide it and not talk about it because subconsciously that's the story that you told yourself. You won't be able to heal until you have an experience of not blaming yourself and being kind to yourself and loving yourself through that situation.
Erickson was so big on that. He would always say that line that changed a little bit, but
Yeah.
you said it earlier. It's like our job as therapists is to give the client an experience of having been healed in the moment.
Yeah.
That's what our job is. And if I'm going to describe how hypnotherapy, especially trauma-focused hypnotherapy, works, it's the process of being able to do that. So then there's an alternative in the client's mind rather than the rigid thought of there's no alternative. I need to be stronger. I need to be safe.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you a follow-up question. One that I get oftentimes too. How long does that process take? How long, like, great, Zach, I'm sold. I'm on your calendar. I'm showing up for my appointment. How long is it going to take me to fix this trauma? I get that question all the
I
time.
know,
You
right?
you do too.
Yeah, yeah.
I know you do.
I said it like this the other day. Uh, I said to a client, I said, as long as it takes for you not to believe those negative things about you.
Yeah. I add to that. I think people really want relief, and so they're coming to us in some pretty dark times, looking for some relief from the things that are going on. And so I tell them like, there's no magic number of like once you hit 6 sessions, once you hit 8 sessions, you're magically healed. But what I can tell you is two things. Uh, One, your mind will take this process as fast or as slow as it needs to do the work well. And
Yep.
so we can trust that your brain is going to complete this process in the way that it needs to. Because, like we talked about, like depending on the story that's told, that story can be very, very simple to address and kind of put back on the right path, or it can be very difficult because it is much more tied into identity. So that's one. There's like one, we have to trust your mind, and rushing this process or taking too slow can cause issues. And so I'm going to assess the situation and take as long as it needs to address this appropriately for you. That's one. But the simple answer is people who are looking for relief is I've never had somebody who doesn't feel different after the first session.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everyone feels a sense of relief after the first session. You will notice improvement. When do we get to the maximum level of improvement where we're good to go? You go live your life on your own? Well, I can't tell you the exact number, but you'll feel better after day one.
And on top of that, it's like we're addressing a trance, whether that's a negative trance that they're bringing into the session,
Yeah.
or we're addressing a positive trance that I'm trying to give them. That's going to be pretty quick. But how many trances do we have?
That's a great question. Is like, I told myself this story, but this story is tied into that story, and that story is tied into this one, and that one's tied into this one. And so it's like, oh man, in order to release this simple thing here, we've got to trace it back down and cut this one open first, and then subsequently the rest. So it depends on how far that kind of like daisy chain of trauma goes.
And I'm thinking about my smoking cessation client that I
Those
give
ones are great.
in the course.
Yeah.
And it's like we did one session of hypnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And after 20, 30 years of smoking cigarettes, he quit. Does that mean that this person doesn't have any more trauma? No, but it does mean that the story that he was telling himself about being a smoker, being the person that smokes, that was obliterated after one session.
Yeah, that one was great. You got in there, cut it out, take that, we're done.
Right.
Cutting the cancer out.
And that one was very short.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's that way. There's like this isolated issue that's not like, I use the cancer metaphor, right? Like if you've got cancer like on your skin, they can like, cut it out. And you're usually pretty okay, right? But then like if you have cancer like in your lungs or in your heart, like in your bone marrow, like, okay, that problem is now tied into some essential biology systems,
Systems is
right?
yeah.
And so it's like for that smoking cessation client, like one session, got it in, got it out. It was like skin cancer. Like, okay, we cut that piece off. We're going to monitor it now, make sure that it's good. But sometimes you get in there like, hey, I want to quit smoking. And you realize this is attached to your heart. We've got to go.
Yeah.
We've got to take our time to make sure, one, to remove this carefully. So that way we preserve your heart. And then two, to make sure that we get it all gone.
Yeah, and the cool thing about that scenario was that that person came in for smoking cessation. One session, we had a follow-up session, was like a month or two later.
That's
Like,
great.
they just never like scheduled another second session, a follow-up session, and then they were basically just like, "Hey, these other things from my childhood came up." like 6
Yeah.
months or a year later,
Yeah.
and they did the work of saying, I think that the root of the issue with smoking that we addressed in that first session is tied to the story that I was telling myself about my childhood, and I'd like to address this childhood issue now.
So often.
Yeah.
So often. Yeah. Man. And we can dissect so many things and go so many different places. Like, I think, people often ask, they're like, does it always connect to childhood? And I'm like, well, no, not always. Because there's, again, very seldom things that are always one way or another. But I will say often we uncover some deep stories because the stories that we learn from like 8 years old and younger, and then even more on, but especially 8 years old and younger because of the way the brain develops, um, those stories are integrated into our psyche without any challenge.
Yep.
Because when you're 8 years old and younger, you have no filter to say, is this a good suggestion or not? That's why we're very careful about the movies and the TV shows that we allow children to watch. That's why we have rating systems and we keep kids safe because we know that those stories don't get filtered like they do when they're adults. Like if I go see a horror movie, right? I'm like, okay, well, I know that that's a movie. Like I know that it's fake, like it's Hollywood. The kids don't know that, right? And so the reason it often goes back to childhood is because stories get told to us before they're able to be critically challenged.
Yeah.
And so oftentimes we do have to go back to childhood to see, okay, what story did you integrate into who you are without actually challenging it correctly? Because it was probably a lie.
Or is somebody else's messed up way of dealing with the same situation in their life that they're just regurgitating.
That's usually where it comes from.
Which goes back to how we started this conversation, because it's like, I'm 8-year-old kid. I trust you, parent. What do I know about life? Okay, I guess I'll try and be a real boy like that. Then
Good
there's
little
nothing.
boy,
There's
good
nothing
little girl.
to. Yeah, right. Like
Yeah.
there's nothing to combat that. To say, well, maybe there's an alternative,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe that's not 100% accurate.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay.
So let me ask this. The kind of wrapping up on this topic. Um, This is all great and wonderful about trauma and emotional stuff, but hypnosis makes the claim that it can address some pretty physical things like chronic pain or like we talked about, like repetitive behaviors that we do. They also talk about how it can improve sports performance, right? Motivation. You got a big speech that you got to give and you're super anxious, but hypnosis helps you find the confidence out of yourself. These physical things, how do these same principles apply, or are there different principles that are applying to more physical stuff?
I think that's a great question, and one that we get all the time, right?
Yeah. I think
All the
it's
time.
appropriate to address in this format.
But it's the same answer. It's the same answer as we've been talking about.
Walk me through.
The reason why you're not performing at the level that you expect to is because you can see your potential, and there are those stories that are holding us back. The reason why I have the repetitive behavior is because I know that I don't need to do this, but I don't have any other opportunity to self-soothe because of the stories that I'm telling myself.
Right.
It is the body stuff is the outcome of storing the difference between how I'm performing because of those stories and what I know that how I know that I can perform. And so what hypnosis does is it says when you no longer are self-limiting, like there's no longer those learned limitations that are down here
Mm-hmm.
that cap our performance, we automatically just start growing back up to that level of that is our true performance. And a lot of times, even further, because we didn't know that this was not our actual potential. We were just saying that it's more
Yeah.
than where we were performing. And so it rises up and oftentimes passes that idea.
Yeah. Just to make that simple, it's like, let's say that you're a basketball player who hits 80% of free throws, right? It's like, well, maybe you want to be a basketball player who's 95% of free throws, right? Believe it or not, if you have gotten to 80% of free throws, your mind says, I'm an 80% free throw type player.
Right.
And so even though going to 95, we consciously know is better, the mind still says, I hit 80% of free throws.
Learn limitation.
Learned limitation. And so until you go in, give the experience of being a 95%, a 98% free throw hitter, right? You'll hit that kind of glass ceiling. You'll hit that invisible barrier. And so that's where hypnosis really comes in handy, right? Like same thing for public speaking, right?
Same thing.
I'm a nervous public speaker. Well, you
Oh, are
learned
you?
to do that.
Right.
Like, let's give a different what would it be like if you weren't a nervous public speaker? If you felt the most calm even and comfortable when speaking in front of a group, that was actually like your happy zone.
Yep.
Like it's such a novel idea and one that this person hasn't ever experienced. So by breaking that trance, giving them that experience, they can do that because there's no reason they can't. But we learned to limit ourselves. And until we correct that story, that limitation will continue to be there.
And the principle is the same too, whether it be physical, because I mean, how many
pain too. Yeah.
pain, school, relationships.
School. Yeah. I'm a CD student. Oh no. We can change that so easy. We can go in there. Now, it might be connected to some very deep traumatic stories you told yourself when you were little, but I mean, on the surface level, that we just need a new story. I'm a CD student. What if you're an A+ student, honor roll student? There's no reason. That's what we're kind of doing. And that kind of is magic.
There you go.
It kind of is though. Like,
It
I
really
mean,
is.
I'm getting all kind of emotional about it, but it really is kind of magic because you're rewriting reality.
Yeah.
I mean, facts are facts. Like, reality's still reality, I think. But the stories we tell ourselves about reality can very easily be changed. And there's hope.
Massive amounts of learned limitations when we concretize those stories in our life.
And maybe we'll talk about that next time.
Yeah.
I was having a wonderful conversation with a friend of mine about how a lot of things that we think are reality aren't actually real.
No.
We were driving down the road and I was like, I see you driving inside the lines. Like, you don't have to. I mean, it's probably a good idea that you continue to drive, but we say, I can't move outside the lines. Well, and so, but think about that, right? In a situation where a car crash is happening ahead of us, sometimes people will wait to swerve or wait to get out of the way because they're like, I'm supposed to stay in the lines.
Yep.
So, yeah, if I'm driving safely down the road, it's a normal day. Driving inside the lines is a great way to operate a motor vehicle. But what if the situation changes? Then my story about reality might actually limit me. It might not be the best story to tell myself.
It's absolutely going to limit you. How much really is the key. is because it's like that story is you're going to hesitate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so is that hesitation going to be something that is a hesitation so that you check your mirrors, so that you swerve out of the situation? Or is that hesitation going to cause a fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, and then you crash into the car that's in front of you?
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll have to explore that more. Cool. Well, thanks for tuning in to this episode. Make sure to subscribe and like and share all the wonderful things. Oh, well, I guess that is the end.
That is.
My little light just turned off. That'll be funny. We'll leave it in. Do the fun things. We'll see you in the next episode when my light has recharged. Until then,
Bye.
bye.